Have you ever imagined being ignored in an environment where multi-million-dollar decisions are being made, not due to a lack of competence, but simply because of how you are perceived? In a luxurious hall, illuminated by giant screens and surrounded by conversations about innovation, power, and money, sometimes judgment happens even before the first word is spoken. And that's exactly where this story begins. The tech event was one of those that exuded status. Influential business people circulated with glasses in hand, investors discussed trends that promised to change the market, and startups displayed revolutionary technologies as if they were trophies. Everything there screamed exclusivity, the kind of place where only those who matter enter. At the center of this scene, a billionaire walked with firm steps, surrounded by attention, accustomed to being heard without needing to raise his voice. For him, that environment was familiar. It was the stage where he had always been treated as an absolute authority. As he spoke, people leaned in to listen. Smiles came easily. Each of his comments was validated with nods and discreet compliments. He was in control, as he always had been. He was selling a promising technology, talking about impressive numbers, and conveying the confidence of someone who believed that nothing there could get out of his control. After all, in that world, appearance, confidence, and status usually open all doors, but not everyone received the same look. A few meters away, a black woman observed the event attentively. Elegantly dressed, with a firm posture and a watchful gaze, she didn't draw attention through extravagance but through discretion. She didn't seek the spotlight, didn't interrupt conversations, didn't try to impose herself. Yet she was there for a very specific reason. But to most people in that room, she seemed invisible. Have you ever experienced that? Being present, prepared, qualified, and still being ignored? When their eyes finally met, there was no curiosity, no interest. The billionaire quickly assessed her from head to toe and looked away as if she had no relevance whatsoever in that environment. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't want to know why she was there. He simply assumed she wasn't part of the circle that truly mattered. A silent, swift, and cruel judgment made solely based on appearance. This kind of indifference is subtle, but it hurts. There are no harsh words, no direct confrontation, just silence, contempt disguised as normality. And that's exactly why so many people identify with stories like this, because they don't just talk about power or money, but about something much deeper: who is heard and who is ignored when the doors close. While the billionaire remained the center of attention, the woman stayed there, calmly observing everything. Every detail, every conversation, every phrase spoken about the technology he presented with such pride. And perhaps you're wondering now, why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she introduce herself? What you're about to discover may surprise you more than you imagine. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what seems like just another case of arrogance and hasty judgment is about to transform into something much bigger. Sometimes true power makes no noise. It waits for the right moment to reveal itself, and in that hall full of certainties, something was about to change. And perhaps, as you listen to this story, something inside you will begin to stir, because situations like this don't only happen at large tech events or in halls full of influential people. They repeat themselves in meetings, interviews, waiting rooms, environments where someone decides, without knowing the person, who deserves to be heard and who should remain silent. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Your experience, your opinion, or even that moment when you realized you were underestimated can make someone else feel less alone when they read this. As this story unfolds, it's important to remember that it's not just about a billionaire and an ignored woman. It's about respect, about hasty judgments, and about how often society errs in confusing appearance with worth. When you like this video, you help this message reach further, reaching people who may also need to hear that their voice matters, even when they try to silence it. And If you feel that stories like this need to be told, if you believe that narratives of poetic justice, social upheavals, and reverse humiliation have the power to open eyes and provoke reflection, subscribing to the channel is a simple yet powerful way to say that you want to continue being a part of it. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, creating a community that values empathy, awareness, and truth. Because deep down, each comment, each like, and each subscription isn't just a number. They're signs that this conversation matters. They're voices uniting around stories that need to be heard. And while this luxurious room remains filled with superficial certainties, something much deeper begins to form. A silent tension, a growing expectation, and the feeling that the next moment will change everything. What almost no one realizes in these seemingly elegant and controlled environments is that humiliation doesn't always come in the form of a direct attack. Often it manifests itself in a small gesture, a glance that drifts to the side, an interruption disguised as haste that imposes silence that speaks louder than any word. And that's exactly how everything began to take on a different weight at that event. While the billionaire moved from group to group, talking about strategic decisions, numbers, projections, and the future, her presence continued to be treated as an irrelevant detail, almost a noise. In the scenery, when she got close enough to hear, he spoke louder, as if needing to reaffirm his authority. When she tried to follow the conversation, he cut her off with vague phrases, changed the subject, or simply turned to someone else. There was no explicit aggression, just that cold indifference that carries a clear message: you don't belong here. And the cruelest thing about it all is that, to an outside observer, it seems normal. It seems like just social dynamics. But anyone who has experienced something similar knows the silent impact it has. Some onlookers began to notice the discomfort. One or two realized something was wrong, but no one said anything. After all, questioning someone powerful requires courage, and not everyone is willing to risk their position for a truth they prefer to ignore. The woman remained there, absorbing every detail, not only of the technology being sold, but of the mentality behind that behavior. The arrogance, the absolute certainty of control, the conviction that status is synonymous with authority. All of this was revealed behind the scenes of that seemingly ordinary conversation. This type of situation generates an internal transformation that is difficult to explain. It's not immediate anger nor explicit sadness. It's a mixture of lucidity and restraint, a profound understanding of how the world works for those who choose to judge before knowing. And perhaps that's why this story has such an impact, because it touches on something collective. How many times have important decisions been made, ignoring voices that could change everything? How many truths have remained hidden because someone believed they weren't worth listening to? While the billionaire downplayed her presence, he continued confidently, unaware that each of his actions was paving the way for his own mistake. He spoke of technology as if it were a natural extension of his genius, as if everything were under his control. And, at that moment, what was most striking was not the product itself, but the way he positioned himself above any questioning. His journey seemed built on the idea that power is never challenged, only accepted. But there's something curious about this kind of arrogance. It creates blind spots. And it's in these blind spots that the biggest upheavals are born. The woman, in turn, observed in silence, not out of submission, but strategically. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was reading the scene. It was understanding the timing. It was awareness that certain revelations only have an impact when they happen at the right moment. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this subtle humiliation isn't just a detail in the story. It's the foundation of everything that comes after. It's in this space of veiled contempt that the truth begins to accumulate, waiting for the opportunity to emerge. And the more comfortable the billionaire felt in his position, the further he became from perceiving the reality unfolding before him. Perhaps you're realizing that this story isn't just about prejudice or social status, but about mindset. It's about how some people build empires without ever questioning their own attitudes, while others navigate difficult paths, learning to observe, understand, and make precise decisions. There's a profound impact when someone is underestimated, and that impact doesn't disappear. It transforms into clarity, focus, and preparedness for the moment when the truth ceases to be invisible. And as this environment continues to function as if nothing is wrong, something is silently shifting behind the scenes. An almost imperceptible tension grows, not in her gestures, but in the inevitability of what is to come. Because when the hidden truth begins to align with the right time, no authority built solely on appearances can sustain itself for long. Comment below. This makes sense to me. The atmosphere continued as if everything were perfectly aligned. The billionaire now occupied an even more central space, surrounded by attentive investors, curious business people, and interested gazes at what he called, without hesitation, the product of his dreams. He spoke enthusiastically, describing the technology as a revolutionary solution, something capable of redefining entire markets. Each sentence was laden with confidence, as if there were no possibility of dispute. The numbers were high, the deadlines ambitious, and the promises grandiose. To those listening, it seemed inevitable to believe that this man had complete mastery over what he was selling. He gestured confidently, explained functionalities, cited growth projections, and spoke of global impact as if narrating something already achieved. There was no doubt in his voice. There was no room for questioning. It was as if that technology were a natural extension of his identity, part of the success story he had built over the years. And the more he spoke, the more people leaned in, fascinated by the possibility of being part of something big, profitable, and transformative. But it is precisely in these moments of excessive certainty that the details begin to slip away. While he was speaking, subtle signs emerged behind the scenes. Documents were discreetly exchanged between some participants, hushed conversations took place in hushed tones, and glances met with silent curiosity. Nothing explicit, nothing scandalous. Just that unsettling feeling that not everything was exactly where it should be, like a cog in a machine that spins too well too fast, without anyone noticing the internal wear and tear. The black woman remained there, observing everything with the same calm as before. Her eyes followed every word, every piece of information presented, every statement made with such conviction. At times, she lowered her gaze to the papers she carried with her. At other times, she kept her attention fixed on the billionaire, not with admiration, but with a deep understanding of the situation. It was as if she were seeing two layers at the same time, the public spectacle and the hidden truth that no one seemed willing to notice. That silent attention speaks volumes. Anyone who understands complex negotiations knows that power isn't always manifested through loud speeches. Sometimes it reveals itself in the ability to wait, to observe, to understand the real impact of the decisions being made. While the billionaire negotiated increasingly higher values, discussing contracts, licenses, and international expansions, she remained silent, aware of something that completely changed the course of that negotiation. And perhaps that's precisely what makes this moment so delicate, because the fatal mistake rarely happens abruptly. It builds up gradually, fueled by excessive self-confidence, a sense of invincibility, and the belief that nothing can get out of control. The billionaire didn't realize that by presenting himself as the absolute owner of that technology, he was crossing an invisible line, a line that separates legitimate ambition from dangerous presumption. Some investors began asking more technical questions, questions about intellectual property, usage rights, legal authorizations. The billionaire answered naturally, as if everything were perfectly resolved. His answers were quick, firm, rehearsed. He didn't hesitate, and this, paradoxically, further increased the invisible tension in the environment. because the more confident his posture seemed, the more evident it became that he wasn't prepared for the possibility of being wrong. The woman, in turn, discreetly adjusted the papers in her hands. At a certain moment, her fingers rested on a specific document, as if touching something familiar, laden with meaning. There was no anxiety in her gestures, no hurry, only the awareness that certain revelations carry a weight that demands timing, and this timing cannot be forced. It is recognized. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this isn't just the point where a negotiation takes place. It's the point where decisions made under arrogance begin to reveal their consequences. The dream product, presented with such pride, begins to transform into a mirror of the mindset of the person selling it, and this mirror silently reflects flaws that no one wants to see. There's something powerful about sensing when someone is about to make the biggest mistake of their career without even suspecting it. The environment still seemed favorable, the smiles were still there, the numbers were still impressive, but behind the scenes the truth was calmly gathering steam, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And when that happens, no convincing speech can contain the impact. As the billionaire continued presenting his vision of the future, the gap between what he believed he controlled and reality began to narrow dangerously. A journey built on fragile certainties tends to crumble when confronted with facts. And in that hall, filled with promises and expectations, the stage was being silently set for a revelation that would change everything. Write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too." The atmosphere in the room began to change almost imperceptibly, like when the air thickens before a storm. Side conversations dwindled, smiles became more restrained, and the absolute confidence that filled the space began to find resistance in the silence. The billionaire still spoke, still gestured, still maintained the narrative of control, but something no longer fit. There was a strange pause between sentences, an interval in which glances sought answers that were not being spoken aloud. It was then that the woman stepped forward. There was no drama, no raising of her voice. Her posture was firm, calm, almost serene. She didn't interrupt aggressively. She didn't demand attention. She simply introduced herself. She clearly stated her name, explained her presence there, and, with the naturalness of someone who carries the truth, affirmed that she held the rights to the technology being negotiated, not as a provocation, but as a fact, a simple, direct fact, impossible to ignore. The impact was immediate. The entire room seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Glasses hung suspended in the air, conversations ceased completely, and an awkward silence spread like a wave. It was the kind of silence that reveals more than any exaggerated reaction. A silence of belated recognition, of pieces finally falling into place, of a hidden truth that had been ignored from the beginning. The documents that had been circulating discreetly now made sense. The glances exchanged took on a different meaning. Everything that seemed like a detail was transformed into evidence. The billionaire stopped, literally, his body rigid, his expression caught between surprise and disbelief. For the first time that night, he didn't have a ready answer. No rehearsed speech could save him from that moment. His mindset of absolute control clashed with a reality he hadn't even considered a possibility. The authority he had wielded until then began to dissolve before everyone, not through shouts or accusations, but through the force of an undeniable fact. His posture changed immediately. The confident tone gave way to visible caution. His gestures became smaller. His eyes sought support from the very person who, minutes before, had only observed him with admiration. It was like witnessing a silent power reversal happening in real time. The journey he believed he was leading was now slipping from his grasp, revealing the impact of decisions made based on superficial judgments. The woman remained firm. There was no explicit satisfaction on her face, nor any desire to humiliate. What was seen there was something deeper, the materialization of a poetic justice built with patience. The transformation of that moment was not merely social or financial, it was symbolic. It represented the collapse of a logic that associates value with appearance and authority with noise. It represented the revelation that silence too can carry power. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this revelation doesn't happen in isolation. It's the result of a series of choices, of readings of the situation, of a refined understanding of what was happening behind the scenes. When someone takes a stand with truth, the impact doesn't depend on strength, but on precision. And at that moment, the precision was absolute. Every person present felt the weight of the change, even without knowing exactly how to react. The billionaire tried to reorganize his discourse, recalculate his routes, adjust his words. But something essential had already been lost: the narrative of dominance. The blind trust of investors gave way to a more cautious analysis. Questions took on a different tone. The celebratory atmosphere transformed into reflection. And all this happened without direct confrontation, without spectacle, only with the revelation of who truly held the power from the beginning. This type of moment provokes an internal rupture in those who witness it, because it forces everyone to revise their own mindsets, their criteria for judgment, their automatic decisions. The truth, when it emerges, doesn't ask permission. It simply occupies the space that has always been its own. And when this happens in public, the effect multiplies, echoing far beyond that room. As attention definitively shifted to her, it became clear that this story wasn't just about technology or a contract. It was about recognition, about the silent journey of an observer while being underestimated, and about the inevitable impact of the truth when it finally comes to light. The environment was still processing what had just happened, trying to understand how something so obvious could have been ignored for so long. And as the silence began to break, a new dynamic formed there, opening space for consequences that had not yet fully revealed themselves, but which were already in the air, ready to redefine everything that came next. Comment below. This makes sense to me. After that moment, when silence filled the room, nothing was ever exactly the same again. There were no applause, no heated discussions, no explicit confrontation that could be pointed to as an external climax. What happened was much deeper. It was an internal, collective, and silent change. Each person there had to grapple with their own interpretation of what they had just witnessed. Because when a hidden truth comes to light in this way, it doesn't just expose who was wrong, it reveals how much everyone participated, even passively, in that initial judgment. The billionaire felt the impact first, not just in business, but in the identity he had built over time. The confidence that once flowed naturally now required effort. His gestures carried caution, and every word seemed to pass through a filter that hadn't existed before. The transformation wasn't financial at that moment. It was symbolic. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that power based solely on appearance, status, or volume of voice is fragile. All it takes is a suit, an ID, one person ignored at the wrong time, and everything is rearranged. For the woman, the consequences were different, but equally profound. There was no noisy triumph, no sense of revenge. There was something more solid: recognition, not only of what she legally possessed, but of who she was. Her silent journey, marked by observation, preparation, and conscious decisions, finally found space to exist without being questioned. That authority didn't need to impose itself, because it simply revealed itself at the exact moment, with surgical precision. And that's where this story begins to touch on something bigger than the episode itself, because it speaks of mindset. It speaks of how quickly we judge, how we associate value with superficial signs, how silence is often interpreted as a lack of power. How many important decisions are made every day based on assumptions? How many truths remain hidden because someone decided not to listen, not to ask, not to see beyond the obvious. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because the real lesson here isn't just in the billionaire's mistake or the silent victory of an underestimated woman. It's in the mirror that this situation holds up to all of us. At some point, we've all been on one side of this story, as the one who was ignored, interrupted, minimized, or as the one who ignored, judged, discarded someone without realizing it. True authority doesn't announce itself, doesn't shout, doesn't need to prove anything all the time. It's built behind the scenes, through consistent choices, through the clarity of someone who knows exactly where they stand. And when it appears, it's not to humiliate, but to reposition, to remind us that respect isn't granted by position, clothing, or status, but by the ability to recognize the other as an equal. The emotional impact of that moment spread through the hall and continued to echo after the lights went out. Some people left thoughtful, others uncomfortable, others inspired, because stories like that don't end when the event is over. They continue within those who witness them, provoking silent reflections, questioning old beliefs, and opening space for new ways of seeing the world. Perhaps this is the greatest transformation of all, not the visible change in power, but the internal shift in perception, understanding that arrogance closes doors that respect keeps open, that equality is not just talk, it's practice, and that every journey carries revelations that only make sense when time finds the truth. And while these reflections continue to settle, while the real consequences of that moment are still beginning to unfold behind the scenes, there's a feeling that the story hasn't yet said everything it needed to say. Because some twists and turns don't just happen in public, they continue to unfold long afterward, in decisions, choices, and paths that are yet to be revealed. Comment below. This makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, it's because this story resonated with you on some level, perhaps through reflection, perhaps through identification, perhaps through the feeling that not everything needs to be said aloud to have an impact. And that's exactly why it makes sense for you to be here now. If this content brought you clarity, provoked a new way of seeing everyday situations, or simply made you think a little deeper, subscribing to the channel is a simple way to continue this journey with me. Here, each video is created with the intention of delivering stories that transform the way we see the world, without haste, without noise, with truth. If you want, leave a comment saying you made it to the end. You can write something simple, like, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end." I read it, I feel it, and that helps keep alive this exchange that happens beyond the screen. And if, at any point in this video, you felt a connection, that something made sense to you, a like ends up being a natural gesture, almost like a silent nod saying, "I understood." And before you leave, take a look over there. There's a video that directly connects to everything we've just discussed. It delves even deeper into this topic and can perfectly complement this reflection. Click and continue with me there.